works. I was like climbing the corporate ladder so fast, got to the top of the building and realized I climbed the wrong building, you know? So sometimes we're in so much of a hurry because we think that's what we need to do. And I got to the top and it's a very isolating experience. It's quite lonely. And I realized that I had been in such a hurry that I hadn't built the toolkit that I needed to be successful in those opportunities, in those roles. And I actually think that's true of a lot of people.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Despite a meteoric climb up the corporate ladder and hugely successful career as one of the fitness industry's most accomplished and high-profile leaders, serving at Technogym, Fitness First, and more recently as the president of Life Fitness, our guest today turned his back on the boardroom to pursue a new career as a high-performance life coach, focused on connecting individuals with nature.
You know, ultimately, being yourself will always serve you well, because it's like the truest version of yourself. We're going to see in the global fitness industry much more of a strong pivot towards recovery and overall kind of longevity and a focus on a broad spectrum health, not just fitness. Time in nature is actually incredibly therapeutic for humans. I'm fascinated by the intersection between human health, corporate health, and planetary health.
So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Mr. Jay Worthy to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast.
Jason Worthy, thanks for coming along to the Escape Innovation Centre.
Matt, it's great to be here. It's my first time in the building as well.
And it's now, you corrected me, it's not Jason Worthy now, it's Jay.
Well, it's always been Jay,
Okay.
But I think it's probably worth speaking about that. I was chatting to somebody that we both know quite well in the week. He said, "Are you in trouble with Interpol or something?" But it's not that. It's just that, you know, I think there's a lot of us, we kind of carry a facade in the industry and in many industries, but particularly in the one that you and I both know and love, where we feel like we need to behave a certain way. You know, when I was MD or CEO, I never wanted to show my tattoos because I felt like perhaps that's not becoming of a leader of a very large business, but it's who I am. And so, you know, I think for many years it was Jason Worthy, it's, you know, very corporate. I was racing up the career ladder and we all know how that worked out. We're going to talk about that in a little while, I'm sure. But the reality is I just want to be me. And it's a little bit of, this is who I really am. I grew up being called Jay. My parents called me Jay. That's what I want to be called. I'm not Jason Worthy, I'm Jay Worthy. And so it's also a little bit of the second half of my career. You know, it's a bit cliche, but you kind of think about your career in two halves. And I was really fortunate to have an incredible first half of my career, culminating in becoming president and CEO of Life Fitness. It's $1 billion company. It's an amazing story. It didn't quite work out the way I wanted it to. So I had this period of inflection and reflection. And it's about, okay, what do I want the second half of my career to look like? And so, yeah, it's Jay.
Do you think that...
It's easier to spell as well, so.
Yeah, it is, yeah. Do you think some of that is now you've got to that stage and you're like, okay, I've been through it and I can figure out who I am. Do you think that it still took you to have to go through that and to need to conform to sort of get to a position where you can now say, okay, I can do what I want, I can show my tattoos?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that, right? Is that you get to a certain place, you feel like, okay, I'm comfortable doing that. You know, maybe a younger me perhaps didn't feel comfortable doing that. But equally, I might, if I had the opportunity to go back and give myself any counsel, it would be, you know, ultimately being yourself will always serve you well, because it's like the truest version of yourself. And so, you know, I think probably it worked out fine for me. But ultimately, I think if I could give myself any advice, it would be really two things. One would be slow down a bit, because I was in such a hurry. I was kind of in the fast lane, not really appreciating the view on the way. And the other would be just try and be as authentically you as possible. Even if that means that maybe some people don't give you opportunities, because the question would be, were they the right opportunities?
Yeah, I was going to say that. Obviously, you can look back and say all kinds of things, but to talk that through for the moment, I suppose. Do you see that the end point, if you're yourself, leads down a path that may be more suited to you, where the path you ended up, because you're trying to conform, is probably what you think you want, but may not necessarily be where you should be going? I
think that's absolutely right. I think the reality is that I had a vision of what I thought I wanted to be and do, and we could talk for hours about how I got there and what society expects of us and some of the, you know, the norms that are expected of us, and therefore we end up conforming to them. But if you park that for a second, I had this vision of where I thought I was going to go. And when I got there, it's, again, utterly cliche, but it works. I was like climbing the corporate ladder so fast, got to the top of the building and realized I climbed the wrong building, you know? So sometimes we're in so much of a hurry because we think that's what we need to do. And I got to the top, and it's a very isolating experience. It's quite lonely. And I realized that I had been in such a hurry that I hadn't built the toolkit that I needed to be successful in those opportunities, in those roles. And I actually think that's true of a lot of people.
So at the moment, I was just reading through a few things before we met, and you're plunging into the recovery space a little bit. Tell us a bit about what's going on there then.
See what you did there. It was very good. Yeah, so I guess before that, it's kind of useful to say, I have had some struggles since leaving, Life Fitness and moving back to the UK. And in doing that, I kind of really doubled down on my health. And I realized that perhaps I had been in such a hurry that I hadn't really taken full care of myself. I had this kind of external illusion of health, but in reality, I wasn't healthy. And I was very fixated on certain kind of pillars within your overall kind of well-being spectrum, and had not really focused on self-care, on mental well-being, on resilience, on recovery. So I've been on a bit of a journey of discovery over the last few years, which has allowed me to double down on things like meditation and mindfulness and nature connectedness, which is a big focus for me, cold exposure. And so now, as I kind of transition into doing more consultancy work and supporting organizations and executives, I want to work with organizations that I'm really passionate about, that I also believe are the future of the industry. And so for me, I think we're going to see in the global fitness industry much more of a strong pivot towards recovery and overall kind of longevity, and a focus on a broad spectrum health, not just fitness.
I was with James yesterday, James Balfour from One Rebel, and he was saying the same thing. When they started the business, it was very much about staying up late, drinking, working hard, getting up early in the morning. And he says he's totally changed his view on that now. Now he's thinking about getting his sleep, and he's had his blood work done, and he's focusing on his health really.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm not sure whether it just comes to people when you sort of get to a certain age, or whether people are just starting to understand how to have that more of a holistic approach to your health now.
Yeah, I mean, my thesis is that it's very much aligned to age. So the older you get, the more aware you become of your own mortality, and you maybe have children, or you have people around you that are older and getting sick, and you start to think more about you. But I do think the responsibility on our industry is to help those that are younger, in their 20s and 30s, and even, I've got teenage children, have them think about it now. And if you can make some of those changes in your life early enough. But yeah, I mean, what James was saying to you is so interesting, because it was really not that long ago that you would hear phrases in popular media like, you've got plenty of time to sleep when you're dead, and stuff like that. There was this kind of grind until you die kind of mentality, a rise and grind. And I think, in a way, that's been actually pretty regressive for society and for us as an industry, is this idea that you just got to burn the candle at both ends. And personally, I feel in a way fitter and healthier at 46 than I did at 36.
Yeah, he was saying exactly the same. He said although he had a cold yesterday, he said that he feels so much better now of having this different approach. And I do as well. I got onto and it wasn't that many years ago, I got onto this work, even if you didn't feel like working out, you get up early and work out. I had a chat with my brother at the weekend about the same thing. So you would just do it because you felt that was better than not doing anything. And I think now it's a case of, okay, you're a lot more aware. Maybe today I shouldn't work out. I should do something else. Yeah. And that, I think that's a big shift for the industry, really.
I think so. Yeah, I use a Whoop, and I know some people like it, some people don't. And there's always this ongoing question mark about wearables around, okay, is the data meaningful? And actually, I was reading a really interesting piece the other day about real metrics and made-up metrics. And so Whoop, you could argue the recovery score is really a made-up metric. It's using real metrics like, heart rate recovery and HRV and other scores, and it's then assuming this kind of score of recovery. And that may be true, but the reality is it's still helpful. And particularly when you get into, your older life, I would have been just like you. I would wake up and say, okay, I've got to work out today, but at what cost, and then what impact does that have on the quality of sleep that I have? And therefore, what's really interesting when you start reading the literature is that, our emotional intensity and availability the next day is under pressure when we have poor sleep quality. Our ability to make decisions, our ability to handle difficulty and how irritable we might be is all predicated by the quality of sleep we have, and that's all dictated by what we do the day before. And so, that mindset of just get up and work out and just crush it, and it's just not helpful. Not if you want to be productive and successful in the next day.
The wait is over. Our new Escape Fitness catalogue has landed. This is the essential guide to all of the latest product innovations that are shaping the future of functional training. Bigger and better than ever, this year's catalogue is 190 pages, jam-packed with everything from eye-catching, bespoke functional training frames to some of the latest strength training equipment. So sign up today to receive the digital version today, or be one of the lucky few to receive a hardbound printed copy straight to your door. So what are you waiting for? Go to escapefitness.com now.
I think that's a big thing for me, is understanding the connection now, whether it's just reading a lot of information and then experiencing that myself. But you start to realize, particularly when things are tough, which it's been for many people over the last few years, is that your ability to handle stress, make decisions in difficult situations, and how 4 or 5 wrong decisions can take you down a very, very bad path compared to 4 or 5 good decisions. And the way that those decisions are basically born is based on your emotional state and your energy levels. And then when you think about, like, even yourself, you're probably traveling around the world and getting up, not sleeping, and you sort of think, well, would I make the same decisions if I'd have been rested and recovered and probably been on a little bit of a slower train?
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. I think that's the really interesting question to ask ourselves and be honest with ourselves. And I remember I was chatting to Danny Oliver recently, and he said to me, I remember when you were president of Life Fitness and you couldn't make it to FIBO because you were meeting with potential buyers for the organization. That was in that wild time. And I did a video for all the team to watch at FIBO to apologize for not being there. And he said, you looked broken. Your skin looked gray, you looked tired, you looked exhausted. And we all commented on how grateful we were that you sent the message, but how worried we were for your health. And I couldn't see it at the time. I was just right in it, and I didn't have the awareness, the self-awareness to see what impact it was having. And I also didn't have the skill set or the knowledge to say, okay, I need some circuit breakers here. And I think that's what's really interesting I think that's true of so many people, is that we actually, I read a research article recently that estimated that 80% of people in the workforce in the UK have experienced burnout since 2020, or some symptoms of burnout since 2020. You think, that's an unbelievable statistic. But the scary thing is most people probably don't even realize what the symptoms of burnout are. And we have this, fundamentally we have this kind of use and dispose culture in society today, and I think that's true of our people as well. I think a lot of organizations will just drive a leader to a breaking point and then cast them aside. You see it in professional sport all the time, right? Who was once a great football manager all of a sudden is no longer good, and away they go, and let's get somebody else in. And we just keep driving them hard, never stopping to say, hold on, if we nurture this person and treat them like an athlete and actually help them with their recovery, how much better could they be? How much more resilient and how much more capable could they be?
I think it's even more of a challenge with someone like yourself. That I remember the story that you told me about. How many hours constant rugby did you play in the world record?
30.
30 hours.
Yeah.
So someone that's able to play rugby for 30 hours and hearing the horror stories about your feet and how broken down you were, your ability to take pressure and stress and put yourself under a ridiculous amount of pressure is far greater than most people. And I suppose if you, and I'm not saying you necessarily, nobody else could put themselves under pressure, but I suppose if you've got the ability to take so much and just sort of roll with it, you can probably get yourself in a really damaging situation because your mindset is like, well, I'm not going to give up. Like clearly, if just to do that, you've got a mindset where you're not going to give up no matter what happens. And that's probably consistent in many areas of your life. And you probably don't know when to say, enough's enough. You'll probably just run yourself into the ground.
Yeah.
And so I guess for people like that are generally at top of organizations, they're probably more susceptible to really flipping over the edge than some other people, I guess.
I think that's true. I mean, I would say, I think for a lot of people who are, relatively successful in business, who are hardworking and achieving well in business, I think they generally have a, do or die mentality, and they'll just keep trying to find a way. And it's great while it lasts until it doesn't. And I'll be very open with you. The dream job was the Life Fitness president job, and when I stepped into that role, it was a bit of a battlefield promotion, and probably half the people in the organization, probably 2/3 of the people in the industry were surprised. I wasn't, because I knew I'd worked hard for it, and although I battled with a little bit of imposter syndrome, I ultimately felt like it was an opportunity I deserved, and I went at it full bore, and I think I did a great job. The problem is, and the numbers say I did a great job in terms of what we were able to achieve for Brunswick as a separation. It was a really successful exit based on where they were when I took over. The fundamental problem is when KPS Capital came in and said, you know what, we're going to go in a different direction, and respect to them, ultimately that's their decision. They own the business at that point. I'm left out in the cold, and all of my identity is tied up with being that hard-charging executive, do or die. And all of a sudden, the industry moves on, as it will naturally do, and I'm just on the edge in the cold. And so that kind of mindset that you're talking about, I think, we see it a lot still in social media and popular media, and there are a lot of folks out there, and I won't name them because I don't want to name and shame, but kind of these celebrities and influencers who are in that kind of mindset of, just grind or die. But it's only good until it's not. And then when it's not, you're just on the edge. And maybe they're more resilient than I am, but I found myself in the summer of 2019 with a 4-week-old baby, being told that I had 60 days to leave the country by immigration, cars to dispose of, houses to dispose of, children to take out of school, a wife that was probably at that point now, as we reflect on it, suffering with postnatal depression, moving back to the UK, getting back into their family home, getting kids set up in school. And guess what? When you're that kind of mindset of, I'll just focus on solving problems, that's actually kind of good, right? Yeah. Because it's just problems to solve, and that's what I do. Okay, I can deal with that. Then I got to, so I found out I wasn't being kept on in the May. James had been born earlier on that May, so he was 2 or 3 weeks old when I found out. Then we had to move back. We got resettled in the UK in August, and then by about November, it was just about Halloween, kind of bonfire night, I was just sat in a car on the edge of a forest in tears. Because I didn't know who I was. I didn't know. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know how to go forward. All of the imposter syndrome that I thought I'd buried came back, and maybe they were right. Maybe you weren't good enough to be in that job. And I was completely and utterly lost. And I had no idea who to speak to, how to talk to somebody, how to kind of recover. And so, it's probably a deeper answer than maybe you're expecting, but the reality is that it is a dangerous way to live your life, in that I will take on everything that comes at me and I will never back down, because I'm just a, step forward kind of guy or girl. Because one day you won't be able to do that, because life is turbulent. And then when it comes against you and you don't have the skill sets to deal with it, then I think ultimately it can be a very isolating experience.
So how did you overcome that? And I'll sort of make a comment that I from what I've known you've always had a lot going on. Even the days I remember you used to come and see me and my brother and get the dumbbells, and you'd have, building your own gyms, you'd be working in a company. You was always a person that had lots going on. And my guess is when you sort of came back and reset yourself, you went probably from being 1,000 miles an hour to almost like trickling around at, very, very slowly. Did you find part of the challenge was just having this sort of total stop of everything going on to keep your mind occupied?
Yeah, I wasn't very good at just sitting and reading the paper. It's kind of fun for like a week. What you're going to do, I take the kids to school, read the paper, go for a walk, and it was kind of fun for a while, but then you just get that kind of nervous energy. I've always said all my career, I'd like to work really hard and retire early, and I'm now very much of the mindset, that's probably not what I want to do, because I'm 46 now, and the idea of retiring in 9 years would be crazy to me, because I think I'd get bored. So I really struggled with that. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think ultimately that then started to push me down this path of, well, what do I do now? Again, I'll be honest, you know, I think I told you before we kind of hit record that there's no questions off limits, and I'll always be honest. I was angry. I was a bit embarrassed, you know, because I, you know, kind of got to that role and then wasn't able to see it through. I was upset. I was unsure of what I wanted to do, and I was kind of, I felt like I was done with corporate world. You know, I was just annoyed at that kind of use and dispose mindset, really, and the way that I still think a lot of businesses operate. And so, you know, I felt like I was done. And then I slowly, gradually started to find my way back. And the way I find my way back, by the way, is through nature. So I've always, as a youngster, I grew up, I talked a little bit about when we last spoke, but you know, I grew up running around and playing in the fields and in the rivers in Norfolk. And then, you know, you get into a career and you end up, all of that gets suppressed, and you become a parent and you buy a house and you have responsibilities and you're a leader. And often a lot of us will get into our kind of mid to late 30s, and maybe our fitness and our well-being has taken a dip because we're prioritizing the well-being of others. Maybe you're caring for parents, maybe you're caring for children, maybe you're just working on your business. And so a lot of that gets suppressed. And so I got to a crisis point. So being totally transparent, I got to a crisis point, which I can now call it. I didn't know what it was, but I was scared because I had completely lost. And the main feeling that I grappled with was I was embarrassed and I felt guilty because I felt like I was very fortunate. And so I didn't really have any right to feel sad or to feel lost, because there are a lot of people in the world that are a lot worse off than me. But of course, the problem is that kind of talk is completely unproductive because it doesn't change anything. And actually, you know, when you start to feel those feelings of, you know, frustration, anxiety, depression, and what I probably now would later classify as symptoms of burnout, it's completely aselective, right? It doesn't care who you are.
Did you relabel any of those sort of, you know, feelings that you had at the time to being anything? Or over time, did you manage to sort of relabel what those thoughts were that were going on?
Now I can. Back then, I absolutely couldn't. And so I distinctly remember one day, November, maybe December time in 2019, you know, my wife was kind of saying, "I'm worried about you." And I said, look, we live very close to a place called Swinley Forest, a beautiful forest. And I said, I'm just going to go for a run in the woods. And as you know, I'm not a particularly gifted runner, not built for running. But I do like to go and just kind of go for a trot in the woods. And I hadn't done it for so long because I've been so busy on trying to get Life Fitness in a good place, get the team happy, get the business sold, and then, of course, subsequently get back to the UK, that I hadn't really prioritized my own well-being for a few months. So I said, I'm just going to go out in the woods. And I said, look, don't panic, but I may be gone for several hours because I don't know why, but I just felt like I needed to disappear for 4 or 5 hours. And so I did that. And she was great, obviously very worried about me, but absolutely supportive as she's always been. And she said, okay, just take care of yourself, take your phones, I know where you are. And I went for about 4 or 5 hours and ran for a bit, walked for a bit, and cried for a bit. And I hadn't been able to cry for years, right? And when I say being able to, I just hadn't cried for years. And I found myself walking and crying, and but strangely, after 3 or 4 hours, feeling better and thinking this is a weird experience. And so being kind of innately curious, when I got home, I started reading, and then I started to kind of find literature on these ideas of kind of burnout recovery and what I later understood to be nature connectedness. And that just took me right down a rabbit hole because I couldn't stop, A, thinking about how powerful that was. B, I was stunned that the knowledge had been there since the late 70s with things like Kaplan's restoration theory and Wilson's biophilia. So it's like, hold on, there's a bunch of knowledge out there that humans are rejuvenated when they're in nature, but nobody knows about it. Like, what the hell is that? So that really fixated my mind. And then, of course, the third thing was I just started to feel clearer, like the fog was lifting. So I just did more and more and more of it, and I went on some cool adventures and did some really cool stuff. And just the more time I spent outside, the more I felt like and there's something here. And that culminated in me going back and doing a second master's degree. So I'm just at the end of a master's in outdoor wellbeing and adventure, which is fundamentally focused on nature connectedness. And my study is around this idea that we can decrease burnout risk and lower depression scores in very busy working adults. I'm particularly right now focused on parents, but busy working adults. And that time in nature is actually incredibly therapeutic for humans. So I'm just writing my thesis now. I've done all the research, and then I'll submit this year, and then I'll have that in the bank.
Did that, going through that what is it, like a degree course, is it?
Yeah, it's a master's degree, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Was that also helpful to shift your focus and give you a bit of a purpose to say, okay, I'm going to fill my head, get on with this, and
yeah, for sure. It was. I needed a North Star. I needed something, and again, George, my wife, is just a remarkable person. I think she, when I kind of came to her with this harebrained idea that I'm going to go back to university and do a master's degree, I think she was just aware enough to say, I think it's a great idea, go for it. And she didn't even question it, and was just incredibly supportive. And so, every month I went over to Wales for a long weekend. I did it at the University of Wales, Trinity St David, and it's been great. And I'm utterly fascinated with this idea that we have got quite a lot of research on burnout as it relates to kind of primary care workers, first responders, military personnel, touching on kind of PTSD type research, but there's not enough on what we would call knowledge workers. So, people who are leading organizations, and we see it time and time. We've seen it in our own industry, friends that we know, some that ultimately are no longer with us, some that really, hit rock bottom. I would certainly be in that category. And it keeps happening. And at what point does the cycle break? At what point do we say, okay, we know that this stuff exists. How do we help knowledge workers, leaders in organizations with a lot of stress, a lot of responsibility, build more resilience over time? And what is the toolkit that we need to give them to better serve them? And that's where I think ultimately the future of the fitness industry projects.
How do you, so that's one element you talk about, nature, and without me knowing too much about it, how do you see all of the different elements combined? Because one of the things that I seem to learn going through this pandemic, talking to people and seeing how many people react in it is there seems to be a lot of different elements that require to be pulled together. Like one of the biggest ones that seems to have a massive impact on even getting to the stage where you can start to think clearly is what happens, in terms of your diet.
Yep.
Then you've got your movement, then you've got your recovery, and now you've added another element, which is nature. How are you personally looking at how all those things come together?
Yeah, so on a personal level, I've kind of, gone out there on a voyage of self-discovery, which is quite often how these things happen, isn't it? You kind of learning what works for you. I think one of the biggest challenges that isn't necessarily kind of helpful for our industry is that, ultimately recovery, personal well-being is very unique. So you might say to me, well, I tried cold plunging, it didn't work for me. And I might say, well, it worked really well for me. And we can look at the literature, and the literature will tell us so much. But ultimately, the literature doesn't really matter, because if it makes you feel better or not, then that's all that matters. So where I'm really interested right now is helping people learn how to self-diagnose. Now, I'm not a medical professional, but I do think that there's just lots of noise out there. So should we plunge? Should we do sauna? What about gut biome? What about, we've got Zoe telling us we should wear a continuous glucose monitor and check and see how we respond to different foods. I did the Zoe trial. So I've been in this kind of self-testing mode, trying lots of different things. And I think they're all great. But I think ultimately what we need to help people do is figure out, okay, what's my personal recipe? There's all these ingredients out there. First of all, which are the good ingredients? Put them all on the table. Okay, how do I make a recipe that works for me? And also acknowledging that recipe may change over time. So what I've done is I've just launched recently something called the Resilient Path. And the Resilient Path is a weekly email that goes out to my subscriber list, which is still relatively small, but hopefully it will grow and people will share it. And the Resilient Framework is just basically recognizing all of the things, so recovery, exercise, sleep, inflammation, learning. So we go through this whole framework. We've got energy in there, and then we've got nutrition and tracking, and so you've got all of these kind of different elements. And ultimately, what I want people to be able to do is say, okay, at my moment now, when I check in with myself, how do I index on all of those things? If I were to self-diagnose and give myself a score out of 10 on the quality of my sleep right now, not even worrying about what Whoop or my Apple phone or whatever tells me, what do I think about my sleep quality? Okay, it's a 7. Okay, good. And I go around and I create essentially a histogram that shows me my current, and now I can compare that quarter over quarter. And also I can see, okay, I was crushing it with sleep and now I'm not. What's gone wrong? What's changed? Oh, well, I'm flying a lot, or we've just had a baby, or whatever it might be. Now I can really focus my attention on the things that need to change. Because I think part of the problem, and you touched on it earlier, is there's so much. It's so overwhelming for people. Like, what do I need to focus my attention on? And I'm doing a lot of work. So I'm still a certified personal trainer, and I'm a certified strength and conditioning coach. And so I'm now doing a lot more one-to-one work with people again, which is kind of ironic because 25 years ago, that's where I started. So it's kind of come full circle, but I love that. And what you realize when you start spending time with people one-on-one again is that it's just overwhelming. It's just, where do I start? And so hopefully the resilient framework is one of those things that will allow people to understand where's their entry point and how do I start making micro changes from there. And then I'm utterly fascinated with this idea of micro dosing, because again, I think humans can be a bit binary. It's like all or nothing. Oh, I'm going to give up alcohol for January, or I'm just going to quit smoking, or whatever. I'm going to start running every day, and so it can be like all or nothing. And again, it's very difficult to sustain that. So as it relates to nature, there's quite a lot of research that says that there was a meta-analysis done in 2010 that looked at 1,300 studies on nature connectedness. And what it showed was that the majority of the rejuvenating benefit of being outdoors in nature came within the first 5 minutes. So we're kind of led to believe, okay, COVID told me I should get out and walk more, but now I'm busy again, so I don't walk every day as I used to, because that was my only exercise, so then I went outside. But actually, I just need 5 minutes. So the next time you're feeling stressed at work, go outside, spend some time in nature.
Is that your when you say microdosing? Because I know sometimes in the other people I talk to, it's another type of thing. So you're microdosing nature, is that what you're saying?
I'm microdosing everything.
Okay.
So, again, we're told, so nature is one. So
right.
Microdosing nature, everybody wants to get outside. It's difficult when it's cold, it's difficult when it's winter. But just 5 minutes is really meaningful. Honestly, just 60 seconds. 60 seconds first thing in the morning, stepping outside of your back door and having, the sun on your face is actually rejuvenating, right? And it's helpful with our circadian rhythm. So there's lots of research that tells us that this stuff is really powerful. But I do think a lot of people feel like, well, that's not going to be enough to move the needle, therefore I need to do lots of it. But that's why I wrote in a blog post recently about Sir Dave Brailsford. He always talked about the aggregation of marginal gains. When you add up all those 1%, they make a meaningful difference. So if somebody says to me, and I had this with a new personal training client recently, and they said, well, I want to work out 5 times a week. What do you do today? Nothing. Okay, well, 5's a lot. 5's a big jump from nothing, okay? So how do we just venture into it in a way that we kind of build sustainable habits? So for me, microdosing is about doing anything new in a way that becomes sustainable over time. So if you said to me, I don't...
mushrooms then?
Yeah, no, it's not mushrooms. That's a very different type of microdosing. But, if you said to me, I don't journal, and I would say, okay, well, the literature is actually quite powerful around journaling, about gratitude. And you said, well, I'm going to do it every day. I'm going to do it every morning and every night. And you're going from a standing start to that. It's very difficult to sustain. But if I said to you, well, why don't you do it every Friday morning or every Monday morning? That's something like, okay, I can do that. And then you start building on from there. And so I think that's a really positive place for us to start with these kind of well-being areas.
Even with cold plunging, I was talking to someone who's involved in that side of the business, and I think what's happened is it's gone. What he said is there's an optimal time, and I know there's a lot of research out there, but if we simplify it, you don't need to go in for that long to get an impact. So it's a fairly short space of time. But what the story he was saying is now you've kind of got the guys, and they're like, oh, I did 5 minutes, I did 10 minutes, I did 20 minutes, and he's kind of saying that you've almost sort of lost the whole point of it when you're. Now it's like, well, who can last the longest? Because that wasn't really the idea. It's like getting in there, having this sort of shock for a period of time,
right.
And then getting out. It's not a competition about how long you can stay. And I suppose as an industry and people that are in there, maybe this is a guy thing as well, but you go from this all or nothing, and then if you are in, you're all in, and you go to
Yeah.
the extremes. And in most cases, for most people, you quickly burn out from that anyway,
That's
don't
right.
you?
Yeah,
So-
I think that happens a lot. So yeah, I think there's a lot of competition when it comes to things like that. And that was kind of my comment about, just understanding why you're doing something. So the literature tells us one thing about cold exposure, and that's really important. And there's some great resources out there. I was listening to an amazing podcast the other day, and I think that it's called Wellbeing and Reason. And I think one of the things that's really good about the research on cold exposure is it's helping people feel better about themselves. One of the downsides is there's lots of conflicting information. Is it 11 minutes a week? Is it more than that? What temperature does it need to be? Should it be in moving water? Should it be in still water? What I love about the plunge guys is that they are, they're doing it from a really authentic place, which is they want to create safe environments for people to get exposure to cold water, and there's no judgment, right? So they're not telling you it has to be a certain temperature. They're just creating a really safe environment for the whole family who want to get cold water exposure. I personally plunge pretty much every day unless I'm traveling. I did it this morning, and I am less fixated on the time than ever I was before. But before, I would have the clock there, and I need to know for sure. Need to know for sure that
Right to the second.
But I do know now. What is kind of interesting is I get in, I fully submerge, close my eyes, calm my breathing, and then I'm normally getting out at about 2 minutes without trying. And when you add that up, it's about 14 minutes a week. And when you look at the research, we're told 11 plus minutes a week is about right if you're within a temperature range. So, but actually, all of that aside, park the science for a second, I feel better when I do it, and I feel worse when I don't. So for me, that's almost like the lowest threshold for whether something hits my recovery protocols and my well-being protocols. Does it make me feel better? I don't really care whether people think it's good or not, because if it works for me, I do it.
Yeah, and I also like the fact of, look, it is a bit uncomfortable to go and do that in the morning, and sort of doing an uncomfortable thing, I think also is a good, just for my brain, it has a positive effect than stopping doing uncomfortable things, which kind of is a downward spiral as well.
Yeah, I think when I talk to my own children, that's one of the things I talk to them about, is always making sure that you're continuing to find ways to do hard things, whatever that may be. Could be cold water exposure, but it could be a number of different things. I think when we do hard things and we stretch our comfort zone, we normally either get some kind of personal growth, or, to your point, other things seem easier, right? When you've had to go out first thing in the morning, it's cold, and you get in a freezing cold bit of water, like the rest of the day is kind of manageable, right?
I'd like to go back to the fitness industry and the life fitness story, and in relation to where we are now. And you've been through a number of you've been through both sides of the fence, from the operator and the manufacturers on a number of times. And I'm curious to see, after everything that you've been through, how you would describe, from the equipment manufacturing side of the world and all the people that are playing in that space, how you saw the industry before the pandemic, and even probably up until when you moved on from life fitness, and then how do you see things now when you're out of it and you're almost like an observer on the space? What are some of the interesting lessons that you've taken from that, and what would you probably do if you was in that type of business now?
Whoa. So I think prior to the pandemic, I think generally the fitness industry was on this kind of rocket ship trajectory. We had the boutiques and other things that were kind of out there, but generally it was about just trying to activate as many people as possible. I feel like we were very fixated on movement, and we're kind of very much in our swim lane there. And ultimately, I think we were fixated on this idea that we have to get more people moving, we have to get them into boxes, like we have to get them to come to us. And I think that the pandemic helped us see that movement can happen anywhere. And I think that one of the observations I had as a supplier, having formerly been an operator, and then recently went back to Anytime Fitness for a short period of time, I was quite interested in this idea that we don't own the consumer, and we constantly try and, you see operators all the time trying to own the consumer. And I think it's quite interesting that that's something that's changed over time. The consumer has much more opportunity to have their well-being experience in lots of places. And I don't think it's appropriate for a brand, whatever they may be, to say, well, we want to own everything. We want all your data, Matt. We want you to do everything that you do in one of our ecosystems. No, I just think that's unproductive. And I think actually the younger generations coming through are just going to completely resist that. So that's one of the big things that I've seen. I think the other is that we're indoorized as an industry. And you'd probably expect me to say that because I just finished in a degree in nature connectedness, but I mean it. Like, I think we live containerized lives. We go from nice air-conditioned cars, we go from our nice warm bedroom to a nice air-conditioned car, to an air-conditioned office, to the shopping mall or to the cinema. You know, everywhere we go is like temperature controlled, and we just kind of live in these bubbles, and we're totally disconnected with the world around us. And I am in no way a sustainability expert, but an observation I would make as a consumer and as a human being and as a former business leader is, I think those two things are connected. And I think I'm fascinated by the intersection between human health, corporate health, and planetary health. And I think there's no surprise that we've become so containerized that we almost see ourselves as separate to nature. We don't perceive ourselves as part of nature. Most of us have no understanding of the place around us. We call a sense of place, this idea that I know how humans and other creatures interacted with this space long before I was here. You know, what was on this land before this building was here? No disrespect, you guys probably don't know because it's not talked about. Nobody in the community talks about it. But wouldn't it be interesting to know how people interacted with the land beneath this building? And that might make us better at understanding the impact we're having on the world and understanding how sustainable our impact is or not. So I think that containerized world that we live in is quite worrying. And for a while, I mean, back in the day, Life Fitness launched a Synergy Blue Sky. Do you remember that? Outdoor one. Yeah, it was like galvanized and supposed to be. Kind of only worked in California, I think. That was the problem. But I
was in the rec in Yaxley, and they've got an outdoor thing now. So it seems as though even in places around here, they're doing that kind of stuff.
So my perception would be there were really two main groups in the industry, and people listening to this may like throw things at the screen or whatever because they may disagree, but that's okay. It's a debate. But I would say there were two main groups that were really driving outdoor activity. One is like the organized events companies. Like we had a big boom at times with Spartan and Tough Mudder and all of those kind of races, and they got people outside that obstacle course racing area. And then the equipment suppliers, and that's still kind of out there. Some of the equipment suppliers make this stuff that you see in parks. And then we had some operators starting to do stuff. You guys have done some stuff with operators, normally on the side of a box or, a club or something like that. And it's all good stuff. But ultimately, I don't think we've had a meaningful industry-wide conversation about getting people moving outdoors. From a point of view of, we can't do it from a point of view of how can we sell more equipment or how can we open more clubs? It's like, okay, what makes humans happier and healthier and more content? Well, being connected with nature. Okay, let's do more of that. Let's find ways to get people outside. And when I dig into it, so with some of the research participants I've had, what you find is for a lot of people, there are barriers there. We would perceive nature to be free, but there's barriers. There's socioeconomic barriers. So depending on, what kind of background people have, whether they have access to public transport, whether they live in an urban area. So there are lots of those type of barriers, but there are also like emotional barriers around, I'm maybe not comfortable going out in the dark, or I'm maybe not comfortable going out on my own, or I maybe don't feel comfortable because I don't know how to navigate properly. I'm reliant on my device. So I think there's some really progressive conversations that we can have at an industry level around how do we help humans get outside and get more connected. And my thesis would be, by the way, that will lead to a better outlook for the sustainability of our impact on the planet, because we will develop more nature-connected people that are thinking more about, the impact they have. So that's another one. And then, I think ultimately the other thing that I've seen, the other big trend that I've seen kind of pre-pandemic, post-pandemic is I see a much more broad stream focus on well-being from consumers than I ever felt before. And I think consumers are much more educated, and that's why we're seeing a bounce in things like recovery protocols. So we're seeing more people interested in plunge and sauna and other things because people are much more fixated or interested in longevity. And that happens, right? I mean, in our lifetime, we never had a global pandemic like that before, but you had those moments where, you couldn't really understand what was going on in the world. It's miraculous to believe that just, what are we in, 2023, 3 years ago, we were stood queuing in the grocery store car park 2 meters apart, waiting to get into into Sainsbury's with a face mask on and, getting in places and getting scanned on the foot. It's like something out of a Hollywood movie, but it happened. What do we learn out of that? I think we learned that, we need to have a much stronger broad stream focus on health, not just on fitness. And I think some of the research that's coming out now is actually validating now that people have better kind of underlying health markers, fared better through the pandemic than those that didn't.
Coming up next.
Technology can do all sorts, but I think we have to deeply understand the consumer. In reality, I've been burned out since I left Life Fitness and I hadn't dealt with it, kept kicking the can down the road. A focus on longevity is going to really help us as an industry and as a society to be much more progressive and help people think more holistically about health and less aesthetically about appearance. We've got to help people define their own personal view of health. What is healthy for you is different to what's healthy for me.
How do you think that, in general, and this is meant to be, to have a conversation to explore kind of where, what things we may be missing, but how do you think we're doing? Because you've had roles where you've been an operator and you're running facilities, and you would have your goals of getting people into gyms and paying memberships, etc. But when you look at the companies out there that are providing services to support that, how do you think they're doing now? Do you think that they're moving things forward in the right direction, solving the right problems, or do you think that there's a need to kind of rethink what we're doing? And I suppose being at the top of an organization like Life Fitness, you at the time you were constantly trying to predict where to go with the company and how to direct things, and you were very involved in technology at the time as well. So how do you think we're doing, and do you think things are going well? And if not, where do you think the industry needs to be looking to continue to grow and be successful?
I think we're doing okay. If I were grading us as an industry, I would say, we're maybe like a C-. But they do numbers now, don't they? My daughter did GCSEs not so long ago. They do numbers, but yeah, I think we're doing okay. And I think, like with everything, you're asking kind of for a general overview.
Yes.
But the reality is there are some organizations in our industry that are just crushing it, doing an incredible job. There are some geographies that are doing a great job. Some countries around the world are really over-indexing. So there's pockets of brilliance. There's big pockets of underperformance as well, where I just don't think we're serving the consumer in the right way. Where do we go going forward? I'm just an N of one. I think from my perspective, we would be well served to recenter all of our energy on the consumer and what they need, and try to not come from a vantage point of the products and services that we offer. And that's a really difficult thing to do. When I was at Life Fitness, you're constantly looking at it and trying to be objective, but you're always thinking about how do you sell product, right? Because you're a product company. Unless you want to make the pivot to be a services company or fundamentally reinvent your go-to-market operating model, you're always going to be thinking about it. So if you're a club operator, it's hard not to think about how do I do more of what I do? How do I open more clubs? How do I get more people outside? And so I do think it's very difficult. So I'm not standing here or sitting here smugly saying, well, this is what we have to do. It's a really complex problem. But I do think, for as long as I can remember, we've been at about the same kind of level of penetration. Go to Europe Active and UK Active, and everybody's doing a great job, and we do see these kind of gradual trends around participation and penetration levels. But it's not big gains, right? We're not taking these big step change progressions in the industry where we're suddenly getting, areas of the world where we've got 35, 40, 45%. And that's probably down to a bit of definition. How do we define participation? And then sometimes it's just about the vantage point that we're coming from. So, I don't think we're doing bad. And, I have no idea, which organizations are really going to take the lead, but I feel like doubling down on the consumer and better understanding what they need and how they want to live healthily is going to be the starting point. Some organizations are doing that, but I think many are not.
If you were still at Life Fitness today, and I'm guessing that you had a vision when you were there, because we had conversations about your tech first focus and revenue models around that, which I guess Life Fitness, even probably today, and many companies are very much hard goods businesses, and they're not really in the services in any way. Probably Technogym are the ones that are doing that.
Yeah.
But where, if you were leading the organization today, what would you be driving forward based on what you knew at the time and now seeing how the world's changed post-pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the playbook would still be the same playbook that I was positioning to potential buyers, and we did an investor roadshow because there was a chance that we would spin out as a separate publicly traded company. So we had a dual path strategy, which was, pretty intense, right? But so you're simultaneously trying to do three things. You're simultaneously trying to get the business in a financially, more meaningful position, so it's a better business to move on. And then you're trying to find potentially a bunch of investors who might want to invest when the stock goes live, or you're trying to find a private buyer. So it's like it's a significant process. But the strategy that I was promoting was ultimately one of simplification. So if you rewind, I feel like that organization, and I don't want to just isolate Life Fitness because I think it's a wonderful, wonderful business. There's some incredible people there, great, legacy organization, and I'm cheering from the sidelines. I want Life Fitness winning because I think it's a really wonderful business. But I think over the years, from kind of 2014 to 2019, there were lots of investments, there were lots of things going on, and the business was kind of diversifying, and that overcomplicated it. And so, my strategy that I promoted back then was one of simplification, going back to doing what we do really well. And so, I think that we've seen a little bit of a trend and I think we see this with Peloton, right? You see the fortunes of Peloton and how that organization has changed, absolutely crushing it as a bike and content company, decided they were going to do a treadmill, and start venturing out. Now they're, moving away maybe from hardware more towards software. I think winning in this industry is about two things: is knowing what you're good at and just being excellent at that. And then it's about collaboration. And I don't think we're particularly good as an industry at collaboration, at sharing information. And I think that Europe Active and UK Active and other organizations do a good job of trying to get us all to share more, but we need to do more of that, right? And so, recognizing that, we may be really good at one thing and we need another thing. And that too often that organization will then just try and go and build out the competency and the capability for that other thing. But 10 gets you 20, there's probably already a killer specialist in that area. Just go partner with them and build collaborations. I think that will resonate much more with consumers because it will feel a lot less like we're just trying to own you and a lot more like we just want to bring great solutions so that you can be happy and healthy.
On that point then, because this is quite interesting. If you think about over your career, a lot of the equipment manufacturing companies, a lot of them started with cardio, a lot of them acquired a strength company, then they got involved in functional training and then group cycling, and so they'll add and continue to broaden the services to meet the demands of the industry and try to provide support service to go with that. But in some cases, the industry is growing so vast that the individual specialities in order to do well, it's almost like very difficult to, the book Play to Win comes to mind. It's very difficult to play to win in all these categories. And you tend to get these small companies that just, I remember chatting to some people about, companies that just do accessories. Why do they do so much better than big companies? It's because probably that they just focus and that's all they do. Yeah. If you think about the beginning of our conversation where we're talking about now the industry is like we're getting involved in recovery, we've still got the fitness component and there's outdoor, there's all these different areas. It seems as though to have one company that's half decent at all that stuff is going to be difficult, even though I can start to see people thinking about, well, how do they get in cold plunges and saunas and all that sort of stuff. Do you see that from a buyer's perspective, whether it's an Anytime Fitness or a David Lloyd or a Lifetime Fitness, that could be turned on its head, where you'll probably have people almost like experts, maybe someone like yourself or consultants that that have the broad knowledge about the systems and that, but are actually saying, well, look, I've done my research. This is the best cold plunge. This is the best piece of cardio equipment. This is the best, and almost sort of turn it away from manufacturers providing everything to people having a broader understanding of how to put together all of these solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of started to happen in the club operator space. And in a way, that's a little bit of why we are where we are with some of the equipment manufacturers, because I think maybe Technogym, as you articulated, is slightly different because they're very kind of strong-minded around their vision of what they want to build. It's almost like a walled garden. They're trying to create their own ecosystem, and they're doing a really fantastic job. I think for a lot of the other manufacturers, they've been led by their biggest customers. And again, it's easy to happen, right? There's no judgment with that comment. That when when you've got one or two customers that are 20 or 30% of your income, you listen, right? Because you know that if they continue to grow, your business continues to grow. But unfortunately, one of the byproducts of that is that can often drive your product development, your innovation pipeline, and you end up building more of what they need, which reinforces their control over your organization, right? And I'm not naming any names, but there are some very big brands out there that are very big customers of the suppliers, and they're dictating a lot. So it makes it quite hard for those manufacturers to think about the new adjacent markets that are coming through. And that's why I think collaboration is so important. We did a venture collaboration project at Life Fitness where we seed invested in some companies. Some of those have recently exited at significant multiples. So that project has actually recently just paid dividends. It takes time, but it allows you to invest in smaller niche companies, have some skin in the game in those adjacent territories, but stay focused on your core value prop. But to your point around, who's driving the innovation, I think ultimately, what I like is the way that, and I don't really know whether Life Fitness are doing this now, but I know that, say, Matrix and Precor are trying to do this much more, is say, look, technology is an enabler. So we have this incredible treadmill, like we're the best in the world at building treadmill decks. That might be what they say. I'm not saying they are, but that might be what they say. We're the best in the world at building these. Don't try and go and build your own treadmill deck. It's very difficult to do. There's a lot of product testing, then there's a lot of regulations. There's also some safety issues. We don't want you having anybody get hurt. We know what we're doing. But the console is basically a container, and it can run whatever you want. So let's collaborate on that. You get some developers, get some skin in the game. Don't just sit on the other side and tell our developers that you don't like what. Let's have some talent on your side and let's put them together. And some of the really big operators around the world have done that. And I think the outcomes are really interesting because they're starting to then say, well, I can own the UX and the UI on the console and because I know my customers better than the supplier does. So between us, we can collaborate and create something really meaningful. It's a win-win. For the supplier, you get close, you get deep, and you feel like you're getting good partnership, and you feel like your customer's got some skin in the game. They're co-invested in actually creating a solution that works. And the consumer gets a product that really makes sense for them, not a generic product like you talked about before. So I think we'll see more of that, but that doesn't answer the question of how do you kind of develop and design for these kind of new emerging markets, and that's where I think collaboration and venture investment can probably come in.
Yeah, complexity certainly does. You can't help thinking when you see some of the product ranges and the vast amount of SKUs and support and service things that it's like, well, how far can you really go down this? And whether you'll see, we had the conversation about the treadmills before, is like whether it really needs to do all that stuff or whether it just needs to be having very, very simple things that just do one thing, simple businesses. Because I just, although I don't see the numbers for many businesses at the moment, I can't help thinking that many of them are struggling because they're just carrying so much weight and so many different skills to be able to deliver on some of that stuff.
Yeah, so I think ultimately my answer is kind of pretty boring, but also consistent, which is we've got to ask the consumer what they want. And I won't say the brand, so you will have to try and form your own judgment of whether it was when I was on the supplier side or the operator side. But I distinctly remember once sitting with some engineering team around a product, and I'd been invited into the meeting, and they were saying, 66, I think I can't remember the exact number, but let's say 66% of the time people are pressing quick start. We don't want them to do that. We want them to use all these programs. So we're going to hide quick start and put these programs. And I'm like, hold on. If 66% of people are pressing quick start, perhaps they want quick start. So how can we think, and there are some brands out there who do a really nice job of this now, which is just get you going and then ask you questions as you go to personalize the experience. So, it's like with everything, technology can do all sorts, but I think we have to deeply understand the consumer. And I still think there's work to be done there, really understanding the personas and also recognizing that people's needs change over time. So yeah, I definitely don't sit here with all the answers for sure, but I think if I were in those organizations now, they're the questions I'd be asking around, okay, what do consumers of different ages, different demographics around the world, what do they want today? What are they trying to achieve, and how can we best help them get to outcomes? I don't think still we're enough outcome-led.
Technology, I know this is something that you've spent a lot of time on, and sitting in between the manufacturers and the operators now, and being aware that both of those sides, both of those sort of areas of the business also have people like Apple and Amazon and everyone else interested in the space. How do you think that technology can be used for the benefit of the consumer so that they understand what they're using, what's happening from a programming perspective, and because at the moment it's very much, you have Apple and Apple will tell you certain things, and then you'll go into Anytime Fitness or David Lloyd and you'll get some information there, and then you'll go on a Technogym treadmill, and then you'll use a Life Fitness treadmill, and there's all this going on, and to the consumer it's like, well, I've no idea what I've done and where I'm going. How do you think, this is almost like a bit of a blue sky thought, but how do you think technology can be used for the benefit of consumer in ways that, whether you're an operator or supplier, you can be thinking about where you go next in order to become relevant and providing meaningful solutions to the end user, if all that's possible?
Yeah, I think it is. It's definitely like a big North Star question, right? But I think, and I don't stand here and position myself as some kind of technologist or futurist. I am a consumer in the fitness and well-being space, and I have some experience working in these organizations. And my point of view is that there are some devices out there that are doing quite a good job for different reasons. I think that MyZone is doing a good job in creating community, in creating kind of competitiveness, in creating kind of some stickiness. If I have a busy month and I'm not going to get to my 1,300 MEPs, I want them because I don't want to lose my... And so there's something there, right? They're doing something good. I think about Whoop, and I think it's much more focused on athletes. And so I think there's probably an implicit belief at Whoop that people either know what to do with the data, or they'll be working with somebody who knows what to do. So if you're wearing a Whoop and you don't know, you're working with a coach, you can say, okay, Matt, I saw your recovery score is low, let's change the program. What I'm interested in is how do you, that was probably the wrong word, but weaponize that? How do you make that available to the masses? And it comes down to the, now what, so what? Like, what do I do with all this data? And I think even Whoop, which I love and I'm a big advocate for, if I get my recovery score today and I'm planning a really hard workout and I've just got a 34% yellow, which is, 1% off being red, it's not telling me what to do. It's not saying, okay, based on your exercise history, when you were at this and you did this exercise, it's not gone that far yet. But obviously the technology would exist to do that. So in my mind, if you want to be successful with data at a consumer kind of population level, you have to make it effortless and frictionless. If people have to try and take data and then derive decisions from there, I think it's problematic. I think what you need is whatever device you're using, whatever data capture tools you're using, to then serve that up to you and say, okay, Matt, based on everything we've seen in your data, you should probably not work out today. Saw that you're planning this, do this instead, or don't do anything and maybe, plunge or go for a walk in nature or whatever. Do you want to do that, yes or no? And you can still override it. And then, there's some technology out there that kind of does that, but I think that's where we have to get to. Because I think ultimately we're putting too much emphasis on the decision for people that don't necessarily have the knowledge to know how to filter that data and make those decisions.
Where do you see that coming from? I noticed just recently, Anytime, they're partnered up with Apple, so they're offering the Apple workouts, and some of the manufacturers are creating the ability to access some of this information. But Do you think it would be one of the big tech companies that you would tap into? So whether you're a health club brand or whether you're a manufacturer, you would provide that, and then someone would go to your Whoop or your Apple to pull it, or do you think it could come from a fitness operator?
I think it's highly unlikely to come from a fitness operator. Again, I'm no futurist, but I think probably if I were guessing, it will either come from one of the big kind of 4 tech companies, or it will ultimately be owned by them, and it will have come from a startup. The problem is, I think the money available for tech-based startups is not as readily available, and the valuations that we're getting spurned down, these kind of unicorn status businesses, I think we won't see as many of those in our space. It's just, that's a harder journey to go on, and ultimately it didn't serve those companies very well in most cases anyway. And so they ended up with these inflated valuations that didn't really represent the value of the business, and therefore undermined them. But I think ultimately, if you think about the processing power of the big tech companies, they've got the human capital, they've got the technology capital, and they've got the cash capital to do the work, and it's expensive, And ultimately, it's going to be a function of AI, right? Which is, exciting and frightening for people in equal measure, but ultimately it's going to come down to, capability of artificial intelligence and machine learning, I think, to be able to take this disparate, complex, multi-format data and package it into really meaningful insights for people to then take action on.
I want to talk about the operator side, but first, you went to Anytime Fitness and in a senior role, and that was a short stint there. What happened there?
So I think probably the most important thing to say on the get-go is Anytime's an amazing business. 5,000 plus clubs around the world. Chuck and Dave are incredible visionary leaders. The board at Anytime UK are great. The leadership team there, amazing. Loved working with them, and the network is strong, and the growth potential is really strong there. It's really the function of a couple of things. One is I'm 46 years old, and my kids are growing up, and I kind of felt like I was back on the hamster wheel a little bit, and wanting to make sure that I don't miss their childhood. That's been in the back of my mind for a while. The second thing is that, in reality, I've been burned out since I left Life Fitness, and I hadn't dealt with it. Kept kicking the can down the road, and I felt like I needed to take some time out to really double down on my health, and kind of make sure I'm practicing what I preach. And then it's ultimately, you mentioned it already a little bit earlier on, but when you go through all these life experiences, and I touched on it when it talked about, where I focus my time, and, how I show up, and how I want to be perceived, there's an authenticity around what should I be doing? Where do I think I can add the most value? And so the answer of why I moved on is at the nexus of all of those things. It should never be perceived as a reflection on Anytime. Incredible business. And I'll be, cheering them on from the sidelines like I am the team at Life. But for me, I feel like I needed to prioritize my personal health. And the good news is that's all in good shape. And then also, where can I have the most value, and where can I help people the most?
Right. Going through that, a number of it, Fitness First, Anytime. What is your thoughts on that model now? The sort of traditional fitness model, strength, cardio, low cost. There's a number of different sort of price points within that. But how do you look at that as a solution to delivering people's results, and where is it today, and where do you think it needs to go to move the needle to get more people involved?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think the industry probably needs every model, right? I think there will be certain consumers that want that kind of premium big box, and there'll be certain consumers that want just kind of low cost and cheap and cheerful and get me in. And the reality is that their desires may fluctuate over time. It's not binary, it's more of a continuum, maybe linked to your stage of life, whether you've got children and you need a creche, whether you don't have children, whether you've got a good paying job, whether you're low on disposable income, whether you happen to have a gym in your building or not. There's a bunch of reasons why you might choose, and I think we have to kind of be aware of that. I think ultimately, probably what I would say is, I think the biggest challenge I think our industry faces is that the underlying facility costs to run a facility are so high now that I think one of the most powerful models we have in our industry is the small community club. It was one of the things that drew me most to Anytime Fitness last year, is that I think there's a strong answer in creating small facilities where you can get 500, 600, 700 people, maybe 1,000 people, but probably that's the top end, and know them. Like, really understand them, help them on their journey, connect with them, look after them, look out for them. When they don't show up, call them up. And when you've got 10,000 members, it's very difficult to do that. And so I think that model, instinctively for me, at this stage in my career and my life, feels logical. This idea of creating community, a sense of place where we can be really kind of deeply connected with the people and the place around us. So I love that model, but it's hard to make that work. Property is expensive, electricity is expensive, product's gone up in general, everything's expensive. So how do you make that work? And if I flirted with the idea of opening my own club a couple of years ago, it's so difficult to do, like, to make that work. So I think that's a really interesting part of our industry where we might start to see more success if we can find ways to help people get going and kind of minimize their upfront capital outlay.
Do you think that it will, because I was at Until yesterday and we had a similar conversation about it. Do you think there's clearly a lot more value from health and fitness, if you talk about it in broad terms, than we're putting the price to? I would say if you put all those different bits together and add the current value and then what it's really worth and did a good job of delivering it, then it's very, very cheap in most cases. I think the issue in some of those situations is we're probably not delivering what we promise, and that's probably a training issue and getting the right people, etc. But I think it's underpriced. Do you think that if it was put together in the right way and we had the right people there, that the general public would pay more for that if they really understood some of the things that we've talked about today in terms of the difference it can make in all aspects of their life, their relationships and their business?
Yeah.
And if that was to happen, that some of these areas where it's difficult to make it work may be able to thrive?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things I believe in that space, and that is probably a whole separate conversation. But number one, I think, is that I'm not sure that in most cases we actually know what the success outcome is for most consumers. So do we really know, or do we just assume that they want to lose weight and get fit? Do we know? Do we actually know what those markers are? Number two, I think that society as a whole, and that's a big problem, and it's not easily changed, but society as a whole, particularly mainstream media, is positioning unrealistic ideals for people. So they have this unrealistic vision of what they want to be like that is reinforced by everything they see on social media. But the reality is that it's tough to get that. You have to sacrifice a lot. Many won't ever get there, even if they do all the right things. Genetically, they may just find it hard to get there. And so I think we've got some work to do to make sure that we're putting the right kind of role models out there, that at an operator level, we are connecting with the consumer and really deeply understanding what good looks like, and then resetting their expectations if they're unrealistic. And that's a big part. So we both agree, we can't get to 3 months' time. We were working together in a coaching situation. If in 3 months I say to you, how did it go? And we haven't set what good looks like, then it's completely subjective. It's what you feel and it's what I feel. But if we said at the start, okay, good is here, these are the outcomes we want, in 3 months' time, it makes it much easier for us to agree, did we get there? And also check on the way that we're pacing. And then the third thing I think is, generally, I think a focus on longevity is going to really help us as an industry and as a society to be much more progressive and help people think more holistically about health and less aesthetically about appearance.
Yeah, it's certainly an industry which is very focused on appearance. Most of the things that you see in here, and I'm generalizing, but it is, if you ask people, well, what do you want to go to the gym for? Oh yeah, you go there to lose weight. It's not that you go to the gym or see a trainer to improve the quality and length of your life. I think that's starting to come through. A lot of the podcasts and people are now talking about that, and I think you can start to see a different vision of what health and wellness looks like, which is great.
Yeah.
I think the business models that deliver upon that, there's some people that are starting to click onto it, and we hear people that are looking to raise money to go down that direction. But I'd be excited if that could be what the future of the industry looks like, as opposed to a lot of what it tends to be about at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think we've got to help people define their own personal view of health. What is healthy for you is different to what's healthy for me, and allow people to kind of work towards that. I mean, how many times do you hear people say things like, "Oh, she's been training in the gym," or "He's been training in the gym," and they've not lost any weight. They've been going for 6 months. Well, maybe their goal wasn't to lose weight. Maybe it was to feel better about themselves. But I think we've got to do more of that. And I think there are some operators out there. Anytime does a really nice job of this. And I know some of the other brands do a nice job of kind of shining the spotlight on members with different stories that are not there just to look like a Men's Health cover model. But we've got more to do. We've got more work to do. I think you're right. I think there's some really positive green shoots, and I think it's an amazing industry, and one that generally is populated with people that want to help others be successful. I just think we've got to get a lot more granular on what does success look like for people. I
think it doesn't help also. I've interviewed a lot of people that come from a diet and nutrition perspective, and it doesn't help that those things are in isolation. And I keep talking about Until because it's in my mind, but what they're doing is bringing some of these things together so that you can actually go and do all the key things, because I think we all know the diet's the main driver in a lot of this, and if you don't get that right with your sleep, the exercise is not going to be effective. And most people don't really understand that, and they just think if you lift some weights and run on the treadmill, you're actually going to get there. And so any way that you said, like those collaborations where some of those things can be packaged, I think will help.
I think that's really powerful. I'm going to go and check out Until. I've been reading about them, so I will go and see and tell them that you sent me their way. But what I think that's kind of similar in a way to what I was saying earlier about the resilient framework, is this idea that there's almost like a flywheel, right? And I think that generally as an industry, we focus on kind of historically two areas, either movement or diet. And to your point, they're disconnected. They tend not to be together. And then there's all these other points. Nature connection is one I will continue to bang the drum for because I think it's important. There's, mindfulness, there's meditation, there's sleep. So there's lots of things. There's cold water exposure. And I think what's really interesting is recognizing that there are multiple entry points to a healthier, happier future. And it doesn't matter which entry point, imagine a circle that's got 10 doors around it. Go through whichever door you want to move the needle today. So if you feel like your sleep is terrible, go through the sleep door. Just focus on getting better sleep. What will inevitably happen is you'll have more energy the next day. You'll want to maybe exercise more. You may then start to think about the quality of the food you're eating, and you start to go on the journey. But for some people, if we push them through the wrong door, it's just not going to feel right for them. And I know plenty of people that you try and push them through the exercise door or push them through the diet door, and they're not interested. So you've got to find the right door for the right person. And then once you do that, we get them in, and then, it's like a process of osmosis.
You've had some great opportunities and had a great career in the first half of your business period. What would you say are some of the qualities that you've had that have caused that to happen, and have you in any way focused and developed specifically on them?
So I think I mentioned imposter syndrome earlier on. I think that's quite an important piece, because there are periods of my career where I felt like I probably didn't belong in the role I was in. Like maybe I got put into it earlier than I expected, probably as a function of a couple of things, confidence, willingness to step up and give something a go, bit of resilience as well. So there's some of the qualities that I probably had that allowed me to be in those positions to then say, oh, we'll take a swing and give them a go. And more often than not, they worked out pretty well. But I think in periods of time, your imposter syndrome plays a role, and we kind of think of that as quite a binary concept. You either got it or you haven't. You're either confident or you're lacking self-confidence. But again, I think that's it's like a fluid scale, continuum, if you like. Sometimes you feel high on confidence, sometimes you feel low. So I think probably a ability to manage that. I had a conversation with somebody who I'm doing a bit of mentoring with at the moment, who's a successful leader, mid-30s, and he said, I can't shake this feeling of imposter syndrome. Well, maybe you shouldn't try and shake it out. And that's the conversation that we had, is around, like, it's not necessarily removing it, because it will come back occasionally. That's completely normal. Anybody who watched the UFC recently and saw Tom Aspinall talking about how scared he was of the guy he's fighting, I think imposter syndrome comes in at all the times of your career. It's learning to deal with it, not eradicate it, that is powerful. So I think I probably had a pretty good ability to do that. So yeah, I think also, I said it on when I came on your podcast before, one of the things that I said there, which I've spoken to a lot of people about since, is one of the main things that people say to me after watching that episode is, I think calmness as a characteristic in leadership is a really important one that we don't necessarily talk about enough. Because I think that when everything's going off around you, the ability to kind of process information, stay calm, and make a decision is probably a superpower. That if people work on that, it is more enabling than other things you might think for leadership. Certainly in my experience, and leaders that I've seen be really successful, is calmness under pressure. Interestingly, by the way, just as a kind of a flag for people, I realized I was burnt out when my calmness started to go, right, and my irritability started to increase. So that's, I think, just an interesting thing for people to know, is like, how do I know if I'm getting burnt out? There are signs.
Well, I guess you go from the sort of, what is it, fight or flight mode, to the rest, what is it called? The other one, parasympathetic and sympathetic. I guess when you are calm, you're actually in the right state emotionally and biologically. And probably, as you said, when you recognize that, your body's just not operating where it should be. Yeah. And then you make those sort of panic decisions, which are generally not good.
Yeah. So I totally agree with that. And so I think that idea of being calm is a key one. And then probably the final one I would say is understanding the pace that the organization needs to go at. And I've met with a lot of people recently and over my career who are just unbelievable rock stars, just machines, an ability to just go and go and go and go. And they're very impressive individuals. The problem with people like that is eventually the people around them are just like, well, I can never keep up with that. So they just check out. And the analogy I always give, it was in Liz Adams' Multipliers book, is the pace setter. So if you think about, if you wanted to run a 5-minute mile, if I set off at 4-minute mile pace, I've lost you, right? Because there's no way for you to keep up. So if I want to help you run a 5-minute mile, I would need to have the ability to run a 4:55 mile really well. And that drags you to the 5-minute mile, because you can just see me think, I can catch him. He's close enough that I can get to him. And so, I think sometimes leaders feel like they always need to be just driving hard and setting the standards and up at 4 and emails and working from holiday. And that is exhausting for the people around you. And so I think being attuned to that and recognizing the emotional impact you have on people around you is probably, again, another leadership quality that we don't necessarily talk about enough.
So what are your final thoughts, and based on where you are at the moment, like what would you say, where are you thinking about your life personally and from a business perspective, and what do you hope the next sort of 4 or 5 years to hold?
So I think my number one priority right now is my family, and making sure, I've got 5 children, and I want them to be, happy and healthy and have the right.
Itself.
Yeah, it is. And there's the spectrum. I've got the youngest is 2 tomorrow, and the oldest is 17. So, I've got quite the spectrum. But my heart is full, and it's an amazing life, and I love my kids dearly, and I want to make sure that I help give them the best platform in life. And I actually don't even think about or mean financially when I say that. It's more emotionally, and without sounding too profound, spiritually, just like life is hard. And I feel, and my parents are amazing. I love my parents dearly. I don't necessarily feel like I was well prepared for some of the stuff that I've had to deal with over my life. And so I think it's just, I want to help my children build the emotional skill sets to be able to deal with life. And I feel like young people today have got a tough future ahead of them. The planet's in a difficult spot. The economy's in a difficult spot. It's harder than ever to follow your dreams, I think, right? So I just want to help prepare them. That's a big priority for me. And in terms of my work, I guess there's a couple of things. One is continuing my studies with Nature Connection. I think that is something that I feel really passionately about. And I'd like to bring that knowledge to this industry that I love and have us think a little bit more about how to get humans more connected with the planet around them, and at the same time get them active, living happier and healthier lives. And then the third thing is I am doing some work with organizations, generally with either young founder operators or less experienced founder operators, and working with them on growth strategies, but also personal strategies around managing their own lifestyle. And this journey of building a business, attracting funding, achieving scale, getting an exit is exciting but exhausting for a lot of them. And so I am hoping that in some way I can kind of pay it forward a little bit. I feel very fortunate to have had the career I've had, so I'm hoping that I can help some founder operators in that kind of space.
And then my final question, Jason, since we last spoke, what would you say is an example, get my words out, is an example of you escaping your own personal limits outside of some of the stuff we've spoken about?
I think probably being vulnerable. If you go back 4 or 5 years, I wouldn't have talked about anything that we've talked about today, because I felt like there was a persona that a leader of a large organization has, and I needed to conform to that. And I believe that it's important to be vulnerable and open. Two of my children are boys. I think it's particularly tough for young men at the moment because I think they don't really know how to process their emotions. And I see that. I've got a 10-year-old boy, and he already struggling, with how can I express my emotions. So that's really important to me, to be vulnerable in front of the camera. And it's difficult, it's difficult talking about sitting in your car crying, not knowing who you are and that you were lost. But it's also important because we lose too many people to suicide because they don't know how to deal with stuff. And I that needs to stop. So I think for me, escaping my limits was probably having some of the bravery to say some stuff in front of camera and to the industry that I've never said before.
Thank you, Jason, for your time today. We could have talked a lot longer, but maybe we'll have to get you back once you have your new venture.
Thanks.
Off, and maybe we'll do it outside in nature.
Let's do that. That'd be great.
Thanks for coming down.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Matt.
it.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you've got any value from it whatsoever, then please do us a favor, like, subscribe, tell somebody, and that will help us to be able to continue to do more of these and help you escape your own personal limits. Thanks for listening.